Right, so picking up where we left off yesterday. Okay, so again, yesterday we kind of talked about politics after World War One and the impact that that's going to have. Okay, so go ahead and label this in your notes, talking about post-war industry. Okay, so remember we talked about during the war, industries were focused on producing all of these goods, talking about they needed more war materials. So when we talk about the War Industries Board and places like that. Well, after World War One, the demand drops. So there's less need for these productions. Okay, so a lot of soldiers returning from war did not have jobs. Because of this, there's a lot of tensions, and workers began to strike all over the country. Okay, so economically, you see there's a lot of tension because there's not as big of a need for industry jobs. Okay, so make sure you write this down, pause it if you need it, okay, and get these points down. Okay, one big social impact of post-World War I is going to be this idea of the Red Scare. Now, remember, when we refer to someone as red or an event as red, we are often referring to them as a communist country or communist person, okay? Make sure you're able to identify this symbol with communism because you'll see that in a lot of pictures and cartoons, okay? So at this time, there's an increased fear because Germany and Russia at this point have become communist countries or are suffering from communist influence. And basically, when we talk about communism and why it's a big deal, communism goes against our economic system of capitalism. Under communism, you take away social classes, so there's no poor, there's no middle class, everybody's supposed to be equal, and you take away your system of government. Okay, so at this time, because Germany and Russia are going through this kind of communist revolution, some communist parties rise up in the United States, and because of that, they believed in overthrowing our government, okay, and that's why we're scared of it. So on this slide, make sure you understand that Lenin is controlling the Red Army. Remember, we associate red with communism, and they're taking over the government of Russia. Okay, same thing. Make sure you understand this red iceberg political cartoon. You will definitely see that again. Again, when we're talking about red, we're talking about communism. You see the symbol of communism here, okay? You see the boat of USA heading towards what's called in this cartoon the red iceberg. And you see the countries behind it with tombstones, okay? This is referring to countries that have already fallen under the influence of communism, okay? So we wanted to avoid the red iceberg so we would also not fall to communism. With this Red Scare, you see a big rise in suspicions and things like that, and people being accused of communism, okay? So make sure you know this term, the Pomerades. You see it up here in the title and here below, so make sure you're highlighting that. And basically, especially if you were an immigrant, if you were suspected of being communist, you could be attacked or even deported, okay? So you see the picture here, suspected Reds or suspected communists are being arrested, okay? In the early 1920s, the man who was leading these Pomerades, his house was bombed in response to these attacks. With the rise of the Red Scare, you also see this rise of nativism, okay? We've talked about this in a couple of different units. Make sure you know that nativism is an anti-immigrant attitude, okay? So discrimination against foreigners, okay? One big example I want you to know is the Sacco Vanzetti trial. Okay, that one specifically is about 2 Italian immigrants who were accused of armed robbery and murder. Again, the evidence behind them wasn't very clear. There wasn't enough to convict, but they were convicted and they were given the death sentence because they were immigrants and because they were anarchists, okay? And anarchist just means people who believed in no government, okay? Another example of nativism is this idea of the quota system. Under the quota system, we limited the number of immigrants who were allowed in the United States, okay? So depending on what country you're coming from, there was only a certain amount that could come in, okay? And I want you to watch this video that kind of summarizes the Sacco Vanzetti trial.
Despite the economic boom times, the Roaring '20s was a period of great tension between Americans. Social, racial, and moral beliefs were constantly being challenged. A fear of communism, socialism, and anarchy, fueled by a distrust of any foreigner, led to one of the most notorious convictions and executions in American history. Two Italian immigrants, shoemaker Nicola Sacco and fishmonger Bartolomeo Vanzetti, were accused of robbing and killing a factory paymaster and a guard. Sacco and Vanzetti admitted to being anarchists, people who want to abolish all forms of government, and to being draft dodgers during World War I. However, both maintained they had not committed the crime. On the basis of circumstantial evidence, Sacco and Vanzetti were convicted and executed. Their guilt or innocence is still debated today. Guilty or not, the case personified the fear Americans had of immigrants. Some paranoid citizens felt immigrants took jobs rightfully belonging to American citizens. Others felt too many immigrants were political radicals. Between 1919 and 1921, the yearly number of new immigrants had shot up from 141,000 to 805,000. And Congress bowed to the pressure of Americans with nativist attitudes by passing a new law limiting immigration into the U.S. Additional restrictions were imposed 3 years later when the National Origins Act of 1924 further limited immigration. The acts discriminated against people from Eastern and Southern Europe, mostly Roman Catholics and Jews, and excluded the immigration of Japanese citizens altogether. The laws did not apply to immigrants from the Western Hemisphere, however, and approximately 1 million Canadians and 500,000 Mexicans crossed the borders into the U.S. The increasing popularity of nativism also stirred the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, whose members had tormented and killed many African Americans in the South after the Civil War. The new Klan extended their bigotry to anyone not American, not Protestant, not white, while attempting to stamp out unions and saloons. By 1924, it boasted a membership of more than 4 million members. The imperial wizard of the KKK summed up the Klan's doctrine succinctly in his 1926 booklet, The Klan's Fight for Americanism, when he revealed the Klan's slogan, Native, White, Protestant, Supremacy. Although the KKK dominated certain state politics at times during the Roaring Twenties, its popularity waned after Indiana Klan chieftain D.C. Steve Stevenson was indicted and jailed for a brutal assault on a female assistant. The resulting scandal and his conviction for second-degree murder signaled the decline of the Klan's political influence, and by the end of the decade, membership had dwindled to only 50,000. While the hateful Ku Klux Klan was growing in popularity, a peaceful separatist movement was gaining a large group of followers.
So you see the video tied into exactly what we'll talk next. In the 1920s, you see a increase in membership and rise in power in the Ku Klux Klan, or the KKK. So we talked about this after Reconstruction and post-Civil War. It's kind of died out, and then you'll see it come again, okay? So under the Ku Klux Klan, again, increase in power in the 1920s. And then around this, I want you to write the basic beliefs, okay? So remember, the KKK is a white supremacist group, okay? They believe that the white race is superior to all others, okay? So they're anti-black, anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic, and that means anti-Jew, so make sure you put that down. They are anti-Catholic, anti-women's suffrage, okay? So they did not want women to vote, okay? But in their kind of agenda, one of their main goals was to be like the protector of womanhood, okay? Anti-bootleggers, okay? So they were very pro-prohibition and did not like illegal alcohol. All right, so this leads us into what we're talking about tomorrow. So once you get this done, make sure you are working on your term sheet.